Hey, it's Court. I'm here to tell you a little bit about hiking boots and how you can pick the right hiking boot for your next adventure. Or if you haven't gone out at all, I'm here to give you some tips on what to look for before you hit the trails with your tennis shoes and end up slipping, sliding all over the place, and potentially wearing your feet out. First, you want to think about what kind of hiking you're going to do. Are you going to be going fewer than 8 miles on your next hike? Are you going to be regularly going 8+ miles all the way up to 25 miles? Are you going to be carrying a heavy pack? Are you going to be mountaineering and really need a lot of support, maybe even camping, carrying a 50-pound pack? These are all really important factors when you buy a hiking boot, because the boot's really, it's the first thing that hits the ground. It's really how you interact with your environment, and it's important to get something that's going to support you, or like I said, you might end up with a hurt foot. So I've got a few different hiking boots here to choose from, and I'm going to work my way through the list and just kind of give you a basic idea. If you're hiking less than 8 miles, you're not carrying a pack, and it's just something that you do for fun, you're taking it kind of easy, look for something light. This is a low-top boot right here, so is this one. It's fairly light, and so that's going to be easy to walk with. It's fairly flexible right here in the toe box and the midsole, and that's going to allow you to feel the trail and kind of grip your way along. It's how tennis shoes normally fit, and it's what most people feel the most comfortable in, but it's not necessarily the best if you start going long distances, because bend over time, that's gonna start to wear your foot out and you're gonna be bumming. So taking a look at this boot here, this is something you might want to try out if you were hiking 8+ miles all the way up to, I'd say, 20-25 miles, and maybe carrying a 20-pound pack, day pack. This boot has a little bit of a stiffer midsole, and that's going to help support your arch. It's also going to support your toe box. You can imagine there are all kinds of little joints right in here on your toes. You've also got your ankle flopping around. A boot like this is going to move some of that energy and move some of that work from your shoe, from the smaller bones and joints in your foot up to the larger muscles in your legs, your thighs, and your knee. And that's a good thing if you're going a long distance. So you can really tell the difference when you're in the shop by actually picking the boot up and bending the toe like that. If it's a little bit stiffer, that's going to be a heavier duty hiking boot. If it's lighter, it's going to be a little bit of a shorter distance boot. Another thing to look at is the tread. So we're looking here at the boots, and you can see that the tread on this boot is narrower and it's kind of sliced up versus this boot where it's a little bit chunkier, and this is going to wear down slower. Again, if you're carrying a big pack and you're going a long distance, maybe you've got extra weight pushing down on these lugs versus this one, and so even though it's a little bit bigger, it's still going to give you that same sort of grip. So that's another way to distinguish between a lighter hiking boot and a heavier hiking boot. Moving on from the actual design and the feel of the boot, you would want to consider what kind of membranes are incorporated in your boot. Are you going to be somewhere that's wet? Like this grass actually is a little bit damp today. Is it going to rain on you? Are there going to be puddles? If so, you might want to consider Gore-Tex or another membrane, a waterproof membrane. That's actually a fabric that's woven into the boot. A lot of people think Gore-Tex is some sort of coating. It's actually a membrane. It's like a fabric sack that is woven between the upper and the liner of your boot, and that makes it so you can actually dunk your foot into water and it won't go in unless it spills over the tongue gusset right here. So a membrane is an important consideration when you're looking at a boot, but it affects more than just whether or not the boot's waterproof. It also adds stiffness. So if I had a non-Gore-Tex version of this boot and a Gore-Tex version, the Gore-Tex version is going to be stiffer because there's more fabric there. What that also means is it can rub on your foot a little bit more. It's a little thicker, and it's just potentially a little bit more abrasive where the joints in the boot are. So keep that in consideration too. Make sure that you break the boot in a little bit and wear it around the house or just to work or wherever before you actually take it out for a hike, especially if it's a Gore-Tex boot, because otherwise you might end up rubbing on your foot a little bit. Another thing to consider is what the upper is made out of and how it's constructed. So you can see the upper on this boot is kind of an exoskeleton. It's got a few pieces of leather. It's also got fabric. This is going to be more breathable and it's going to potentially wear out a little faster because there are more seams to get caught on things and to sort of come unfrayed. This boot, by contrast, has a leather upper, and it's pretty much one or two big pieces of leather that are connected all the way through, and that's going to make a real difference over time. This is going to wear a little bit better and not break down. This is probably a 5-year boot if you can take care of it. This is a 2-year boot. Fit is also a very important consideration when you're purchasing a hiking boot, and I'm just going to go over that real quick here. What you see is a light hiking Columbia low-top boot. I showed this before. It's got light tread. It's fairly flexible. Now, when you're at the store and you're trying something like this on, it may feel good at first, but you may be feeling like, oh, is there too much room in the toes, and all that kind of stuff. It used to be people would push down on the toe and feel where your toes actually were lining up. You don't really do that anymore. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense because these boots can have rubber bands up here protecting you. They can be pretty rigid, so it's hard to tell. A better way to measure whether or not the boot is actually a good fit is to slide your foot all the way to the front so your toes are pushing against the front edge of the boot, and then put a finger back here like I'm doing right now. You can see that my finger goes in. It's a little snug, but it's not super tight, and that's telling me that this is a good fit. I've got a little bit of wiggle room in there, but when I put my finger in there, there's not a whole lot that I can do. If, by contrast, you're putting your finger in and actually moving it around a lot, that would mean the boot was too big. Now, the only time where this doesn't apply is if you have a really wide foot. I've seen this in several cases. People will buy a boot that's actually a little bit too long, and they'll be able to wiggle their finger around quite a bit. But they're doing that because they need the width, otherwise it will hurt their sort of foot area and their toes, and so they're willing to forego that snug fit, and that's okay as long as you can lace it up tightly so that your heel isn't coming up and down when you hike. This is especially true if you get high-top boots, because then you can lace it really high, and that's going to keep your foot both from sliding forward when you're on a downhill section and keep your heel from coming up. So do the finger test next time you're looking at boots, and avoid doing this. So hopefully that gives you a brief introduction to the different types of hiking boots, lower end, higher end, and then the absolute highest end trekking, which you couldn't even bend. You'd be doing this and it wouldn't even bend. That's a trekking boot. That's 25 miles plus. That's carrying a really heavy pack, and I don't have one of those with me right now. So just kind of know that there's the low, medium, the higher end. The first time you go out onto the trail with your boot, make sure you bring some Band-Aids. Make sure you've broken them in, as we talked about earlier, so that your feet don't get hurt and that you can enjoy your first experience with your new boots as best as possible.
For the full written review, images, and updates, head on over to h1ker.com. Hiker.